Yes, the Oilers were very good when I went back. They had the run and shoot. They had Warren Moon. Jack Pardee became their coach. Glanville was their coach for 1 year while I was there. And an assistant coach on that team, I should not fail to mention, assistant defensive backfield coach for the Oilers in 1989 when I started, was a very intense young fella who came from West Virginia where he played football by the name of Nick Saban.
Right.
So anyway, the Oilers had 3 or 4 real good years, and then things got lean. Meanwhile, all over the country, people were getting new stadiums built, particularly those that had been playing in multi-purpose baseball, football stadiums like the Astrodome was. So in 1993, Bud Adams asked me to begin the process of trying to get a new stadium built in Houston. And over a period of 2 years, we spent well over several $1 million and an awful lot of time and blood and sweat and tears trying to get a new stadium approved, but it just wasn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so in June of 1995, Bud Adams was flying back from an owners meeting. He called me up on the phone. He said, "I think we're going to have to think about moving." And that we had the kind of relationship where he didn't have to say, "You better start looking." Just the fact he said, "I'm going to have to start thinking about moving," and I knew what that cued. That cued me to get to work. So I sat down at that particular point in time. We looked around. Okay, he was not a Baltimore or a Los Angeles type guy. He wasn't into crab cakes, and he wouldn't have been good on the West Coast in Hollywood. But I had, going back to that picture with Bowie Kuhn, I was at Opryland Hotel. I got to see baseball, minor league baseball in Nashville. I saw Nashville was exploding as a community. I saw it as being Atlanta 25 years earlier when Atlanta first began to explode. And so I went back to him. I did some research and I went back to him and I said, "I think that Nashville is the place we ought to look into." And I arranged for a meeting with representatives of the mayor of Nashville. And so on the 5th of July in 1995 at O'Hare Field, we met in one of the private meeting rooms and talked about the feasibility of doing it. 2 weeks later, I flew down to Nashville. I used an assumed name because by that time, people were looking. I flew under Stuart McIntyre. That's a history story. We'll get into that the next time you call me. But anyway, I flew down and I met the mayor of Nashville, who later became the governor of Tennessee, Phil Bredesen. And his last words to me were, "If you come, we'll build it."
Wow.
And so over the next 4 weeks, we negotiated and sat down and put together a deal. And we had scheduled a preseason game in Knoxville at the University of Tennessee's Neyland Stadium. And so it was the week before that we finished the negotiations. They announced that the stadium deal was going to we gave them exclusive negotiating rights.
Mm-hmm.
And we announced the stadium deal and that would be exclusively negotiating with them. In other words, if they did what they said they were going to do according to a timetable, then we would come. Well, it was an absolute shock. It was one of the best kept secrets ever. And the media people who I'd been very close to were very PO'd, would be the only word to use, because it had never leaked out. Not a word had ever been said that anybody had ever grabbed onto. And so that began a 3-year saga, during which time I lived most of the time during that period in Nashville. The team remained in Houston for another 2 seasons. And then finally in 1988, they came over and they played in Memphis. That didn't work out too well. So in 89, they played at Vanderbilt Stadium. And then in 1990, opened the new stadium, which is hard to believe is now 25 years old. So at the White Sox and in Houston, my career was primarily looking into stadium building and moving teams and all the logistics and everything that you had to do, going through referendums, twice through referendums. One we won, one we lost. The one in Houston, or the one in Nashville, we won by 40% over the opponents. But so that by that time I'd had some health issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat back and I decided that my enjoyment of life was too precious to sit there and find out that I would be, I'd seen too many people that had tried and kept working real hard and had passed away at a young age. So I retired at 58, and
God bless.
I wasn't. Sometimes I wish I'd worked a little bit longer, but because I wasn't in the position that where I was wealthy, but I certainly was comfortable. And so we decided to, in 2000, we moved back to the Midwest, and we decided to come to Indiana for the reasons at that time. I had two sons living here. My brother was living here. And of course, I have a farm 25 miles away. And I decided that it was a lot slower pace of life than living in Chicago. So that's what brought me to West Lafayette. And I'd moved around an awful lot during that first 35 or 40 years after I got out of school. But the last 20 years, I've been in one house. I never thought that would happen before.
So we had a couple other slides that we're actually up against the time a little bit. The two things that I wanted, and maybe you can just comment briefly on them. The St. John. So is it fair to say that a St. John's alum is responsible for planting the seed for a NFL team to move to Nashville?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was my. Bud Adams. I worked for him, but he had great confidence in me, and I went ahead and picked Nashville out, and he fell in love with the place when he went over there and thought that the people were great and they were honest. And Phil Bredesen was a guy, if he told you it was going to happen. The ironic thing is, you see Phil Bredesen holding a football there. That may have been that was after we passed the referendum, and it may have been the first time in his life this Harvard-educated computer wonk had ever in his life held a pigskin in his hand. But he was a businessman. He realized that pro football could be a real stepping stone for the city of Nashville as far as bringing the things. He saw football, and he had built an arena that they also have professional hockey. He saw professional sports as giving Nashville the ingredients they needed to improve their quality of life so that people like Nissan, which moved from Long Beach, California, to Nashville with its United States headquarters, and many other companies have moved to Nashville, where you go by there at a time when there's not a lot of construction going on other places in the country, and they've had just high rise after high rise being built there. In fact, the biggest problem they have right now is they're getting very close to being in gridlock, because they don't have the transportation system to be able to support the number of people they now have living there.
Right. So, again, I'm trying to be mindful of the time here. One of the terms that you'd used, and maybe we can use this topic as to kind of close out our discussion. The one thing that, and we talked specifically about this, it's about relationships.
Yes.
And going through some of these slides here, this is you and your brother, and a couple of those slides. I think Stephen Buck was in one of those pictures here, and these are.
Steve Buck was my freshman year at St. John's. Steve Buck was the lieutenant in the Academy of Band. Dennis Kairos was our captain, and I saw Steve at a reunion a couple years ago, and just a great guy. Interesting story about him. Our two lieutenants in band company were Merle Cook and Steve Buck. Mm-hmm. Their children married.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes.
So we had a couple of questions that came in. Well, one was just a comment. So Bill Hammock, who was a classmate of yours, graduated from St. John's in 1960. He also went to Purdue, and now lives down in Bonita Springs, Florida, and said Randy Whitman from IU lives in their condo.
That's great. Well, and the great thing about that is I'm sure he knows Eric Christman is living over in Mount Dora near Orlando.
Sure.
I was down and saw Eric and Marcia back in January and spent some time with them. But the thing I remember about you, Bill, I remember we were both catchers and we had Duty was ahead of us. So, but if I have it right, we were both catchers on the St. John's baseball team with Cap Reardon. And yes, you see there the three people I mentioned, two of which, well, I've mentioned Eric, of course, on the left, who was president of the class and Mr. Everything, and is just the most humble and down-to-earth guy you'll ever want to meet in your life. And we've had a great friendship now for 60 years. or almost 60 years. The guy in the middle is Albert Scazzari. Al was my roommate for 2.5 years. We had the only room that was not an officer's room that had 2 windows in Hazelwood Hall. If you go by there, you'll know which one it is. It's on the first floor, and it's got the window that's got a brick wall in front of it, which is Scott Johnston. And then the other window faces towards the Musso Hall, which was the canteen. And Al and I were together. I saw him he and his wife out in Phoenix 2 years ago this summer when I took a trip out west. And of course, we were hoping to see each other at our 60th reunion back in May. But of course, we know that was another casualty of the COVID. The guy on the right is my roommate when I first went to St. John's, Richard Deitch. And I want to mention, because the other guy I didn't say too much about was Bob Osland, who was the chemistry teacher and was also the choir director. I sang in the choir, and so did Richard Deitch sing in the choir. Richard was 2 years ahead of me. The only thing we found out that we had in common when we were roommates was that his brother and my brother both dated the same girl at Calumet High School on Chicago's South Side. But I lost track of Richard, and then I didn't have much contact with St. John's from 1959 until 1991, when I asked my brother if they would probably allow me to be an old boy if I went to some functions. And he said, well, he says, if you write a big enough check, they'll probably let you name a building after yourself. So I did become a contributor to the St. John's Annual Fund at that time. And along the way, I learned that Richard Deitch was out in California. And I learned that he'd gone to Nashotah House and had become an Episcopalian priest. Well, Richard was Jewish, but he was a secular Jew. Mm-hmm. And so, I thought I got a directory. I think it was in 1994 or 95, they published a directory. And so I got his phone number and I called him up, and he got on the phone and he says, who is this? And I says, it's Mike McClure. There was a long pause. I said, your roommate from St. John's. And then he kind of said very casually, or not casually, but guardedly, he says, oh, okay, I remember you. And so we got to talking, and the more we talked, the more animated, and the more he became like the guy I remembered from when we were young people. And of course, anytime you get a call from somebody you haven't heard from in 45 years or something like that, you're going to be a little bit guarded. But anyway, Richard, I said, you're an Episcopalian priest. He says, no. He says, I'm a Catholic priest. He had been an Episcopalian priest, but he had become enamored of the Catholic Church. And so he had gone ahead and become a Catholic priest. And he was the assistant to the Archbishop of San Francisco. And so it was a great story. I've told the story to many, many people about, the experience which many of us that went to St. John's, I think, went through. I was from a very Irish Catholic neighborhood. I wasn't Irish Catholic, but I grew up in that neighborhood, learned to cross myself in Little League because you didn't want to be different. And so going to St. John's was the first exposure to different ethnic groups. And, I had not known any Jewish people prior to that. I hadn't known any Greeks. There were a lot of Greeks in band company. Pete Kairos was Greek. The Mata brothers that were over in G Company. And so that was the other part of it, is it was really a great opportunity to kind of test your wings. And, when you stop and think, we used to I could hop on the Rock Island commuter train, go down to LaSalle Street Station, hop on the Milwaukee Road, get to Milwaukee, and then all I had to do, they brought me by bus, but then all I had to do was arrange for a ride from Milwaukee out to Delafield. Sure. But the world became much bigger by going to St. John's, and of course, beyond that, we know how much it expanded. I flew to California in 1951 when I was just a kid. And so I know how much the world has changed, and how much St. John's has changed, and how that's one of the reasons why I've become so involved in trying to be helpful to the Academy.
So we've got 2 comments here. Bill Hammack responded to your comments about being both catchers. He said you have a good memory. I got splinters on the bench as a catcher at Purdue. So
and he got to know Ray Schalk.
Oh, I bet.
Ray Cracker Schalk was the assistant baseball coach at Purdue, and I would imagine Joe Sexton was probably his coach when he was at Purdue. Just tell him I live right out there where Alex Agassi used to live in Capilano. Been there 20 years.
So we have one question that came from David Mann. He's an alum from 1994. He says, "Thank you, Mr. McClure, for doing this. I have a son that is in high school and has an interest in sports management field and becoming involved in some form with professional sports. What advice would you have for a young man interested in this field? And thank you for your perspective."
Well, the real quick answer would be, first of all, become as involved as you can in some area of a sports activity. If you're in high school, get involved. If you're an athlete, well, that's one thing. If you're interested in being a student manager, if you want to keep statistics, go to the coach. And I used to do all those things. I did statistics for our high school basketball coach at Morgan Park Academy. And of course, I had written and broadcasted at DePaul when I went to college. And and of course, at that time, they didn't have, today there's probably 100 universities or colleges in the country that have sports management, master's degree programs. You can go in there, you can be facilities management, you can be going into professional sports, you can go in there if you're interested in being an agent. There's a whole great opportunity out there. But the biggest thing I found is I had so many young people that would come to me and say, "I love sports. I want to work in sports like you do. What do I got to do?" And I'd say, "Well, what have you done?" And they had done nothing. So the important thing is to start as young as you can. And, whether it's broadcasting, whether it's writing for the school newspaper, whether it's volunteering in the sports information office, get your foot in the door and start developing a network.
Right. Thank you so much for your advice on that, and hopefully David shares that advice with his. There's Bill Hammack acknowledges that yes, he did, and Ray made me run for hours because he snickered at him when he could get the ball past the pitcher's mound when throwing to second base. And then of course Dr. Chrisman, thanks Mike for a great time and lots of great memories. So.
Well, it was terrific being with you, Steve, and I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to visit with you and to reminisce and talk about some really great times. And, at the heart of it is St. John's, and we know that right now the whole world is going through a terrific crisis, and nobody is suffering more than academics, whether it be our kids that are going to elementary school, whether our kids go into high school, colleges, and universities. And of course, at the bottom of the food chain, unfortunately, are private institutions, be they colleges or high schools or schools like St. John's with St. John's Leadership Academy and the Military Academy. So, I think we have a great group of alumni. Sometimes we're not all pulling the same way. If we could ever find a way to get everybody pulling the same way, I think we could provide the support that's definitely going to be needed to get through some difficult times, because we don't know what the new normal is yet. I mean, we think it's going to be around the corner. It's going to be next week, next month. But with each passing day, it begins to look like it's even further down the road than we thought it would be. So, labore, ludre, orare.
I couldn't think of a better way to end the conversation. Mr. McClure, thank you so much. This has been an absolute treat. I've enjoyed not only this conversation, but our conversations leading up to it. And I very much look forward, God willing, we're going to get through this COVID thing and have a splendid reunion come May. And very much look forward to seeing you in person and picking up where we're leaving off tonight.
Likewise, Steve. Take care. Have a good night.
Take care. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for joining us, and keep yourself tuned in. We will be in the future events. We'll probably have we're planning a scheduled a spotlight series for December. So stay tuned to your Academy announcements when we make those. Again, Mr. McClure, once again, such a great pleasure. To everyone else, have a blessed evening, and we'll see you down the road. Take care.
Carry on.